Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now I have gone completely Conflikt 47 brained recently. I really need some help. What it does mean is I've been painting a fair bit of these unusual sort of diesel punk troops for the new game. Well, the second edition of the game rather. This fella here, he is the platoon commander from the British Starter Army, so he's unique to that box, as is pretty much everything in there at the moment. But I figured since I'm going to do him, I might as well pop him in front of the camera and have a go at it. So this one today I'm going to be using quite a few paints from the British historical set from the Army Painter, but as I'm going to mention a few times, there are a bunch of alternatives you can use. Vallejo is probably your easiest bet, but it's up to you. So the paints will be listed in the description below. No more mucking about. Let's get started. So once your miniature is tidied up and popped on his base, it's time to go ahead and prime him. Now here what I've used is Russian uniform from Vallejo, which is what I would use to actually base coat the tanks of the British Army. Now I thought of a little bit about whether or not I was going to do him brown like the ones on the box, or if I wanted to, and I think this is the cooler looking option, put him in something which is more reminiscent of British armour. I had considered whether or not I would do his armour darker, something more like refractive green like the British helmets, but I thought that would probably be a little bit dark, and plus armour looking like armour, that makes sense to me. If you wanted to do him in beige or brown, more like the box art, then I'd suggest check out the automated infantry that I did, or you could even start from something like Xandri Dust and give him a more sandy looking finish. It's up to you. A little bit of experimenting with your colours is not going to go awry here. Now, despite having just mentioned treating him like a tank, we're still going to paint him largely like infantry. So I've got a tiny wee bit of water just on the end of my brush, and I'm going to pop in some Moonstone skin from the Army Painter. Now you can use anything you fancy here, a Bugman's Glow or similar, does not matter. Painting skin is pretty much your choice. All the same, I think I might have watered that down a little bit much. Yep. So, let's rinse my brush off and get some stuff that I haven't added quite so much water to. And we'll try a different... There we go. Now this is still going to need 2 coats, but all the same, it'll cover quite nicely. So too would Bugman's Glow. Anyhow, let's pop on our skin layer. So I don't all that regularly demonstrate the difference between 1 and 2 coats, and there's 1 coat. So you'll see there's a little bit of the primer still showing through. Nothing that we need to worry about. Just pop another coat over the top. And then we have a nice solid skin tone. So the same is going to be true of anything where I mention 2 or 3 coats. You just let the first one dry thoroughly, then come back for the next. We're going to move on to his uniform, because he's not fully enclosed. And here what I'm going to use is mid-battle dress. Now this one's from the Army Painter. They are available individually at the moment from the Army Painter's website, although the British historical paint set is probably the best, if you want my humble opinion. Now there's loads of alternatives. Historical colours have been on the go for years, so you can use Vallejo's, battle dress, or anything similar. Honestly, at this point in the war, you could also use just a quite flat brown as the American-made War Raid battle dress starts appearing. But yeah, rambling aside, this is what I'm going to use, because I quite like this particular battle dress. What I'm going to do is to lean into the contents of that British historical paint set a little, because I figure if you're going to pick it up, then there's probably some use in seeing a few uses for it. So what I've got here, this is ironically rifle brown, which is a nice warm, almost leathery colour. Now it is brilliant for rifles, however, I kind of like it more for leather. So what I'm going to do is pop over the boots. This guy's got an interesting, these pouches that are on the Galahad Infantry. They don't scream canvas webbing to me. I kind of feel like they look like they are treated leather, so that's how I'm going to paint them. Now, having just used rifle brown on the leather, I'm actually going to use mud spatter on the rifle. This, to my eyes, is a slightly more convincing wood colour. This is quite close to leather brown by comparison, but it is a little bit more saturated. Now, while we are still in the realm where we can make a bit of a mess, what I have is my matte white. And here I'm going to lay down the Tesla rifle's glowy bits. And goodness me, I did not mean to get quite that excited with it. As well, these little bits that are going to be targeting stuff up on his shoulder, spot those with a bit of white now too. Now I'm going to pick up some gunmetal, and I'm going to go over, funnily enough, the metallic parts. Now, if you have got the paint set, you'll find that this is called steel, and it is a wonderful, middling sort of metal color. Not too dark, not too light, and takes a shade well. Now, while I was thinking about it, I think rather than doing the frogging and the braiding that's hanging from his epaulets here as a cloth material, what I'm going to do is do this in the same gunmetal / steel and make it look like it's actually part of the armor rather than sort of knotted onto it. So I'm going to take my time here. Any mistakes, of course, we are still coming back later to pop a little bit of that green back over the top. Now, I've made a bit of a mess in a couple of spots, but that's why we're always painting up, because the next paint layer that we put over the top essentially acts as a tidy up without having to come back and go over and over with our base colors. Now, what I have, this is true copper, and I'm going to go over the brassy bits on the back of his armor here. Now, for the cables, pipes, and sort of rubberized stuff that he's got, what I'm going to swap to is actually Vallejo's German Grey. Now, this is a very, very dark grey, almost black, but it's got a tiny wee hint of blue in it as well, which is quite nice. Like I said, gives that rubberized appearance. Now, if you wanted to stick to Army Painter stuff, then Strap Grey is pretty much one for one with this. But otherwise, yeah, a dark grey is a good choice. Very quickly off screen, after doing the black, what I've done is a little bit of crystal blue and pure red on those targeting lamps. At least I guess that's what they are, you know. What I'm going to move to now is Russian uniform from Vallejo from the pot. And here is where we get to do all of our little bits of tidy up. So taking my time here to go over the bits where I have splurged with the colors that I don't want there. Now the last of the base coats. If you've been watching from the beginning, you already know what I've chosen here, but what I have is Beret Maroon. You could paint this dude with a black beret, but while we aren't painting a real figure, these beret colors did mean something, even in 1947. So if he's wearing a black beret, he's a tanker. Now, I guess if you sort of take the approach that armored infantry, do they count as tanks, ? Then sure, a black beret makes sense. But I'm going to put my guys on the table. They're always going to be veterans. So I start seeing either SAS or Marine Commando. Now, putting a green beret on this dude would probably look pretty cool as well. But I want to splash a color. And I don't have any other SAS dudes for my Northwest Europe British Army. So these guys are going to stand out and look cool. Now that red always dries way darker than I think it's going to, so I'm quite happy with that. Anyhow, what I'm going to do now is to shade him, and here I've mixed up, this is equal parts of strong tone, soft tone, and speed paint medium. Now the strong tone is there to give us the shading, the predominant sort of shading effect. The soft tone is there to give it a little bit of warmth, and it will work quite nicely over the green. And the speed paint medium is there to make sure that it doesn't sort of kludge up and give us big, heavy blops of color. Now, if you've seen on the channel before, you've been around a while, this might look familiar to Ali's brown liquid. And yeah, it's more or less the same principle. All the same, you could just use strong tone. If you fancied, you'll just get a darker finish. But I am going to go over the entire miniature, except, very importantly, don't apply this over the Tesla rifle. Now, it might not look like very much going on, but as it dries, we get loads of shading, and it does dull down the colors just a little. Not so much, though, and that's what the speed paint medium is really there to do. What I'm going to turn to, though, is some dark tone, and this I'm not going to thin down. I'm going to pop this over the metalwork for the rifle. However, I am not going to put it on the white bits. So this little strip of metal here, I'm going to ignore that, because once we apply the glow effects, it's not really going to stand out all that much if we have missed it. And it's way easier than struggling around trying to do it. So, a bit of dark tone onto the metalwork. And if you want, and what I think I might do as well, is once I've popped it on the rifle, I'm also going to put a little on these bits, the backs of his legs and what have you. So we could go ahead, pop the glow effect onto his Tesla rifle and call it done, but let's do a couple of highlights to brighten things up a bit, make him look a little more interesting. I'm going to start with barbarian flesh, and what I'm going to do here is to cover over most of his skin, but leave that shaded moonstone stuff in the recesses. Now if you want to, you can actually go back to moonstone skin and brighten up the flatter areas with that first, but I tend to find if you've thinned down your wash before applying it, you will likely not need to do that. So, a bit of personal preference here. Okay, then what I've got, and this is quite a jump. I've actually made up a mix here. This is about half and half Dorado skin and barbarian flesh. I'm going to use this to bop in just the very tip of his nose, his cheekbone, brows, and the backs of his knuckles, just to really accentuate the high points on his face and hands. There, now we're cooking. Now what I want to do is to brighten up his trousers a little and introduce a bit more depth, but I don't want to massively change the color. So what I've mixed up on my palette here, this is 2 drops of the mid battle dress that we started with, and 1 drop of light battle dress. And this one's going to do a little bit of lifting on other parts of the miniature too, because it's a wonderful light beigey sort of color. And all I'm going to do is use this to pick out some of the higher points on the trousers. I don't want to painstakingly highlight every edge, but just some of these bits where they're clearly standing out a little bit further from the rest of the trousers. Just brighten them up a bit, and like I said, add a bit of depth. Now for his armor, what I'm going to do to highlight this is get some khaki. Now this one will cover over very easily, and it's worth thinning it down a little bit more than you usually would. Just keep very little of it on your brush to make sure you don't lose control. You don't want to necessarily highlight every single little bit and piece on this, because it will make it look a little bit chalky if you do it like that. But for some of the edges, you can pick which ones are going to have the most visual effect. Oops. Now, if you have any troubles, if you do find that your hands are shaking while you're trying to do this or what have you, just go ahead and blop on a bit of the color. Then you can come back with the Russian uniform from earlier and actually essentially delete the highlight. So don't feel as though you're stuck if you make a mistake. If you want to take that further, you can actually hit it with a little bit of light battle dress at the very corners. That'll look quite cool. You know what? I might actually do that in a second. But first, what I have is fur brown. And this, I'm going to go over the rifle brown that I used for the leather. Just little bits of this at the corner. Otherwise, it's going to look... Too much is going to make it look meaty. And we don't want that. Alright, let's try that light battle dress right at the corners of our highlights. Now at this stage, what I'm going to do is take him outside and hit him with a matte varnish, because I want to varnish him, and everything else that I'm going to do over the top, I want it to retain some of its shine, because we've got the metallics and the glow to do. So let's go ahead and varnish him. Oh, the difference a good varnish makes. Now, what I'm going to do is tip him sideways. Now, holding him sideways is going to be useful, because what I have is plasma coil glow. Now, this is the blue glow effect, rather than the green. And the reason for that is mostly because the blue stuff, the Tesla weapons, have always been blue, and the American ones are still blue as well. Whereas the British ones on the boxes and what have you, they've now done them in green. Now, you could say that there's all sorts of reasons, all sorts of MacGuffins, why the British might have a green glow to their Tesla weaponry. They're using a different phlogiston canister or some such. but I like the blue, and I've already painted a couple of other bits which have a blue glow, so I'm going to stick to this. Just swap out Data System Glow, the green glow paint, if that's what you prefer. Then if you want to, you can accentuate the sort of ribbing pattern in the gun. So a little bit of fresh white. See, as I'm concentrating, I start whispering, and this is way easier without a camera in front of you. But I'm going to dib-dab down the barrel. And I'll also use this to dot in a little bit of white on the corners of the targeting doofers. Yeah, dude. Okay, and then finally, for the metallic highlights, what I have is mithril for the silver bits. And I'm just going to do little bits of this at the corners, because I don't really want his weapons or even his gear to look that shiny. But just a few little bits to brighten things up a touch, give it a bit more shape. And then finally, with true brass, I'm going to touch in the brassy parts. Just a little bit of this at the edges to give it that proper ding in the sunlight. And once I'm done here, I'm going to go ahead and base them. And I've got to base them to match the rest of what I've done already for my Konflikt 47 stuff. So the recipe for that will be in the description. It is relatively simple. It's just dirt and paint and a little bit of static grass. Though I'm actually running out of the old Citadel static grass that I used to use. So, starting to get a bit concerned about that. Anyhow, that's not for you to worry about. Let's get a look at this fella once he is all finished. And so, there at last, our Galahad officer is complete, and I really had a lot of fun painting him. I always do when I actually get around to doing like officers and characters and stuff on the channel. I think there's probably one or two things I would do differently if I'm going to paint the basic infantry. Well, basic as much as power-armored lunatics in the Second World War would be. I think I would likely dry brush the highlights, because this fella's got the braiding and the frogging to watch out for. I didn't highlight him, I didn't dry brush him. I think swapping to the light battle dress and just lightly dry brushing along the edges of the basic guys, who I don't have to worry so much about hitting their weapons or any little details like that, would save a fair bit of time. But this guy, I wanted to spend a little bit more time on him, and I'm quite happy with that result. So, as always, thanks goes out to Exit 23 Games for the light and sound equipment, as well as all of my wonderful patrons who are keeping me ticking in paints and glue, which includes my most gorgeous producers who are showing up on screen now. Thank you very much for your support, folks. Now, any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the old comment box below. My Blue Sky and Instagram, they're both linked there too. So, thank you very much for your time, one and all, and you all enjoy the rest of your day.